As the initial shock of the conflict begins to settle, the human toll continues to deepen. Families on both sides are grappling with a devastating reality that goes far beyond the headlines. In Israel, communities near the front lines live in constant fear of missile strikes that can come without warning. Schools, once places of learning and laughter, have become shelters and safe havens, where children struggle to hold on to fragments of normalcy amid the sirens and explosions. In Iran, the destruction wrought by airstrikes has displaced thousands, forcing them into overcrowded shelters and makeshift camps. The trauma is palpable, stretching across generations and leaving scars that will last long after the guns fall silent. At the heart of this crisis lies a fractured international response. While many governments have expressed concern and called for peace, tangible action has been slow and uneven. The United Nations remains a key platform for dialogue, but divisions among Security Council members reflect the complex web of alliances and rivalries that define global politics today. These divisions have made coordinated sanctions, peacekeeping missions, or aid deliveries challenging to implement effectively. Meanwhile, humanitarian organizations report that many aid shipments are delayed or blocked by ongoing security concerns, leaving vulnerable populations in desperate need. Diplomatic efforts have moved largely behind closed doors. In a bid to prevent further bloodshed, neutral countries and international mediators are quietly attempting to establish communication channels between the conflicting parties. These backdoor talks, however, face enormous obstacles. Hardliners on both sides view compromise as a betrayal, and any sign of weakness can be met with fierce backlash domestically. Despite these challenges, some diplomats remain cautiously optimistic, believing that even small agreements on ceasefires or humanitarian corridors could pave the way for broader peace negotiations. The regional implications of the war are profound and far-reaching. Neighboring countries are watching anxiously, bracing for potential spillover effects. Lebanon, already fragile after years of economic and political turmoil, faces renewed tensions as Hezbollah increases its rhetoric and military posturing. Syria, still recovering from its own devastating civil war, finds itself once again a battleground for proxy forces, with Russian and Iranian interests intersecting in complex ways. Gulf states, while publicly advocating for stability, are also deeply concerned about the conflict's impact on energy markets and regional security alliances. Economically, the ripple effects of this war are felt far beyond the Middle East. Global markets have reacted sharply to uncertainties around oil and gas supplies, with prices experiencing volatility as fears of supply disruptions grow. Countries dependent on Middle Eastern energy are scrambling to diversify sources, while businesses face rising costs and supply chain disruptions. The conflict has also cast a shadow over regional investment and development plans, threatening long-term economic prospects for millions of people in the area. Technology has become a critical front in this war. Both Israel and Iran are employing cyber warfare tactics alongside conventional military operations. Cyber attacks targeting infrastructure, government communications, and critical systems have increased dramatically, adding a new layer of complexity and danger to the conflict. These digital battles are largely invisible to the public but have real-world consequences, disrupting everything from hospital systems to power grids. Experts warn that the risk of escalation in cyber warfare could have catastrophic implications far beyond the region. The psychological toll on civilians cannot be overstated. Mental health professionals working in the region report rising levels of trauma, anxiety, and depression among both adults and children. The constant threat of violence, displacement, and loss creates a pervasive sense of insecurity. Psychologists emphasize that the longer the conflict continues, the greater the risk of long-term mental health crises that will affect communities for decades. Support systems, already strained, struggle to meet the growing needs. In the midst of this turmoil, acts of courage and compassion continue to shine through. Volunteers and community leaders in both Israel and Iran organize relief efforts, often at great personal risk, to ensure that food, medicine, and basic necessities reach those most affected. Stories of neighbors helping neighbors, and even people across borders expressing solidarity, remind us that humanity persists even in the darkest times. These grassroots efforts provide a vital lifeline and a powerful symbol of hope amid the destruction. Political divisions within both Israel and Iran add another layer of complexity to the conflict's resolution. In Israel, debates rage over the appropriate response between those advocating for continued military pressure and those urging diplomatic engagement. Similarly, Iran grapples with internal tensions between hardline factions and moderates who seek economic relief and peace. These divisions complicate efforts to negotiate and sustain ceasefires, as political leaders must navigate domestic pressures and public opinion. As the international community watches, the possibility of escalation remains a constant concern. Any miscalculation or unintended incident could ignite broader violence, drawing in regional and global powers. The fragile ceasefire, if established, hangs by a thread. For millions caught in the crossfire, the urgent hope is for a sustained end to hostilities that can allow healing and rebuilding to begin. Yet, as of now, the path ahead remains uncertain, and the world waits with bated breath for the next chapter in this unfolding tragedy. As the conflict persists, the toll on civilian life deepens with each passing day. Families on both sides live under the constant shadow of uncertainty, their routines shattered by air raid sirens and the pervasive fear of sudden attacks. In Israel, communities near border areas take shelter in reinforced bunkers, while parents struggle to shield their children from the trauma of explosions echoing through the night. In Iran, countless families find themselves huddled in basements or makeshift shelters, coping not only with the threat of strikes but also with severe shortages of food, medicine, and fuel. The resilience shown by these ordinary people, amidst relentless hardship, underscores the profound human cost behind the headlines. Medical facilities in both nations are stretched to their limits. Hospitals overwhelmed with casualties face dwindling supplies and staff exhaustion, forcing doctors and nurses to make heart-wrenching decisions about prioritizing care. The war's impact on health infrastructure extends beyond immediate injuries, as the disruption of routine medical services jeopardizes the well-being of patients with chronic illnesses and pregnant women. International humanitarian organizations have called for urgent corridors to allow critical aid to reach those in desperate need, but the volatile security situation continues to impede these efforts, leaving many vulnerable populations isolated and at risk. Meanwhile, the diplomatic landscape remains fraught with complexity and cautious maneuvering. While official channels of communication are largely frozen, backdoor talks facilitated by neutral parties are quietly underway, aimed at exploring avenues for ceasefire and eventual negotiation. These efforts are shadowed by deep mistrust and political pressures within both Israel and Iran, where hardline factions dominate much of the rhetoric. The regional powers watching from the sidelines are themselves divided, some fearing the escalation could draw them in, while others quietly support one side or the other, adding layers of tension that complicate peacemaking efforts. The economic repercussions of the conflict ripple far beyond the immediate war zone. Disruptions to energy supplies from the Middle East have caused global markets to wobble, with spikes in oil and gas prices threatening inflation worldwide. Nations dependent on stable energy imports brace for uncertain months ahead, while companies face supply chain interruptions that affect everything from manufacturing to consumer goods. For the people living through this war, the economic strain manifests in rising living costs and diminishing opportunities, a heavy burden compounded by daily fears for their safety. Cyber warfare has emerged as a critical front in this conflict, with both Israel and Iran deploying advanced digital attacks to undermine each other's military and civilian infrastructure. These invisible battles can disrupt communication networks, disable critical systems, and sow confusion, with potentially devastating effects. Cybersecurity experts warn that the escalation in hacking and countermeasures could spill over into civilian sectors, threatening financial systems, utilities, and even emergency services. The uncertainty surrounding these unseen attacks adds a new layer of anxiety to an already volatile environment. Public opinion within both countries reflects the profound divisions the war has deepened. In Israel, debates rage between those advocating for intensified military action to secure national safety and voices calling for renewed diplomatic engagement to avoid further bloodshed. In Iran, the populace is similarly split, with some rallying behind government resistance while others express frustration over the economic hardships and loss of life. These internal fissures reveal the complex human dimensions of a conflict often seen through the lens of geopolitics, reminding us that the people affected are not monolithic but diverse in their hopes and fears. Neighboring countries are increasingly wary of the conflict's potential to destabilize the region further. Jordan, Egypt, and Lebanon monitor developments closely, concerned about possible spillover effects such as refugee influxes and cross-border violence. Lebanon, in particular, faces the delicate challenge of managing Hezbollah's involvement, which has at times shifted the conflict's dynamics. The broader Middle East watches anxiously, knowing that any miscalculation could ignite a larger regional war with consequences that would be felt far beyond its borders. Amid the ongoing violence, stories of compassion and solidarity provide rare but vital glimmers of hope. Grassroots organizations and local communities in both Israel and Iran continue to mobilize support for those displaced or affected by the fighting. Volunteers distribute food, offer psychological support, and create safe spaces where children can find brief respite from the horrors around them. These acts of humanity, often overlooked in the larger geopolitical narrative, remind us that even in conflict, empathy and connection endure. The media's role in shaping the narrative around the conflict cannot be understated. Journalists on the ground risk their lives to report with integrity, striving to bring an accurate picture of the realities faced by civilians. Meanwhile, social media platforms have become arenas where misinformation and propaganda often spread as rapidly as calls for peace. The battle for hearts and minds is ongoing, with narratives crafted to bolster morale or demonize the opposition, complicating efforts toward mutual understanding and reconciliation. As the conflict grinds on, the urgent question facing the international community is how to move beyond rhetoric and fragmented responses toward effective action. The window for diplomacy remains narrow but open, demanding bold leadership and genuine commitment from all parties involved. The stakes could not be higher, with millions of lives hanging in the balance and the future of an already fragile region at risk. The coming weeks will be crucial in determining whether the world can steer away from deeper violence and toward a path that prioritizes peace, justice, and the dignity of all affected peoples. As the conflict wears on, the psychological impact on civilians becomes ever more apparent, revealing a profound crisis that goes beyond the immediate physical dangers. Children in both Israel and Iran face disruption not only to their education but also to their very sense of safety and normalcy. Schools shuttered or transformed into shelters mean that for many young people, days are spent confined to small, dark spaces, often surrounded by fear and uncertainty. Mental health professionals warn of a burgeoning wave of trauma-related disorders, from anxiety and depression to post-traumatic stress, that will demand years of healing and support after the guns fall silent. The cultural fabric of affected communities is also fraying under the relentless pressure. Traditions, gatherings, and daily rituals that once offered comfort and a sense of continuity are interrupted or replaced by a stark focus on survival. Religious leaders and community elders struggle to provide guidance and hope, often walking a tightrope between offering solace and navigating the politicization of their faiths amid the conflict. In a region rich with history and diverse identities, the war threatens to deepen divisions and erode the shared cultural ties that could otherwise serve as a foundation for peace. Humanitarian corridors, the lifelines that could ease suffering, remain fragile and unpredictable. Despite international calls and negotiations, the flow of essential goods, food, medicine, clean water, faces constant disruption due to ongoing hostilities and logistical challenges. Aid workers risk their lives to reach the most vulnerable, often traveling through dangerous terrain or navigating bureaucratic roadblocks. Their efforts highlight the critical gap between the urgency of humanitarian needs and the slow, complex machinery of international diplomacy and conflict resolution. The conflict's digital battlefield has become increasingly sophisticated, with cyber attacks targeting not only military networks but also civilian infrastructure like hospitals, water supplies, and communication systems. Such attacks introduce new dangers to populations already enduring physical violence, causing blackouts, disrupting emergency services, and deepening chaos. Cybersecurity experts warn that these silent assaults could escalate further, with repercussions that might outlast the immediate conflict and hinder recovery efforts for years to come. On the political front, pressure mounts on global leaders to transcend their own strategic interests and broker a lasting peace. The United States, Russia, China, and European powers each hold significant influence, yet their competing priorities and alliances often complicate unified action. The Security Council's divisions mirror the fractured international response, with veto powers and national agendas impeding consensus on critical measures like ceasefires and sanctions relief. This geopolitical deadlock underscores the urgent need for creative diplomacy that can break through entrenched positions and prioritize humanitarian imperatives. Meanwhile, grassroots movements across the region and beyond are growing louder in their calls for peace. Activists, youth groups, and civil society organizations are organizing protests, dialogue forums, and social media campaigns aimed at building bridges between communities and pressuring governments to seek nonviolent solutions. These voices often face suppression or dismissal but remain vital beacons of hope and resistance to the normalization of war. Their persistence reflects a widespread yearning for reconciliation and the restoration of dignity and security for all affected. The role of media in this conflict continues to evolve, with journalists striving to provide accurate, unbiased reporting amid an environment rife with misinformation, propaganda, and censorship. Independent correspondents face immense risks while covering frontline developments, seeking to humanize the conflict by sharing stories of loss, courage, and resilience. At the same time, social media platforms are battlegrounds for competing narratives, where viral posts can either inflame tensions or promote empathy. The challenge of separating truth from distortion has never been greater, emphasizing the crucial importance of media literacy for global audiences. Economic ramifications deepen as the conflict persists, hitting ordinary people in profound ways. Inflation and scarcity mean that even basic necessities become luxuries for many families, while businesses shudder under the strain of instability and uncertainty. Regional trade routes face disruption, and investment dries up as foreign partners grow wary of risk. The resulting economic downturn threatens to exacerbate social unrest and prolong recovery efforts, making peace not only a moral imperative but also an economic necessity for sustainable stability. Across borders, the refugee crisis worsens, with displaced families seeking safety in neighboring countries often ill-equipped to accommodate them. Camps grow overcrowded, and resources stretch thin, creating conditions ripe for humanitarian disasters. Host nations face political and logistical challenges in managing these influxes, while international agencies call for increased funding and coordination. The plight of refugees underscores the far-reaching human consequences of the conflict and the shared responsibility of the global community to provide protection and support. As we look ahead, the question of what lies beyond the current violence remains uncertain but urgent. Will diplomatic breakthroughs finally emerge, or will entrenched hostilities continue to drag the region deeper into turmoil? The answer depends not only on political leaders and military strategies but also on the courage of ordinary people to demand peace and the willingness of the world to listen and respond. Amid the pain and destruction, the seeds of hope endure, waiting for the moment when they can take root and grow into a future defined by reconciliation rather than conflict. As diplomatic pressure intensified from multiple fronts, a fragile ceasefire finally took shape after weeks of exhausting negotiations behind closed doors. The United States, alongside key international partners, played a pivotal role in brokering the agreement, urging both Israel and Iran to step back from the brink and engage in dialogue. This ceasefire, though tentative and fraught with mistrust, marked a critical turning point, a moment where the immediate bloodshed was halted, offering a glimmer of hope amid the darkness. The terms of the ceasefire included commitments to halt offensive operations, open humanitarian corridors, and initiate confidence-building measures designed to ease tensions. Both sides agreed to allow international organizations greater access to deliver aid and begin the slow process of recovery. For communities battered by relentless attacks, the cessation of violence brought a bittersweet relief, the chance to tend to wounds, bury the dead, and reclaim some semblance of normal life. Yet, the path to lasting peace remains steep and uncertain. Deep-rooted grievances and decades of mistrust could not be erased overnight. Both Israeli and Iranian societies face the daunting task of reconciling internal divisions, healing psychological scars, and addressing the economic devastation wrought by months of conflict. Rebuilding homes, schools, hospitals, and infrastructure would require resources, patience, and an enduring commitment to coexistence. International actors recognized that ceasefire alone was not enough. Diplomatic efforts gradually shifted toward broader peace talks, aimed at addressing the underlying issues fueling the conflict. These negotiations sought to create frameworks for mutual security, economic cooperation, and cultural exchange, while also ensuring the rights and dignity of all people in the region. The global community's role was critical, not only as mediators but also as guarantors of the agreements reached. The humanitarian response, while still challenged by logistical hurdles, slowly gained momentum. Aid organizations ramped up operations to provide medical care, food supplies, and psychological support to the most vulnerable. Community-led initiatives flourished, driven by volunteers who refused to let the trauma define their futures. These efforts were a testament to human resilience, a collective refusal to succumb to despair. On the ground, stories of reconciliation began to emerge, however modest. Families who had lost loved ones found moments of solace in shared grief, and some community leaders took courageous steps toward dialogue and cooperation. Artists, educators, and youth activists champion initiatives promoting understanding and peace, reminding their neighbors and the world that even amid conflict, empathy and hope could endure. Economic recovery remained a towering challenge. International aid and investment were critical to rebuilding shattered economies, restoring livelihoods, and preventing the poverty that often fuels cycles of violence. Both Israel and Iran faced the task of reintegrating displaced populations and reviving industries crippled by sanctions and warfare. Success in these areas would be essential for sustaining peace over the long term. Despite the ceasefire, vigilance remained necessary. Hardliners on both sides continued to resist compromise, threatening to unravel fragile progress. The international community, particularly through multilateral institutions like the United Nations, pledged to monitor compliance and support continued dialogue. The lessons of the recent conflict underscored the need for sustained engagement and early intervention to prevent future escalations. As the months passed, the conflict left an indelible mark on the collective consciousness of the region. The memory of loss and suffering fueled demands for justice and accountability, while also inspiring calls for reconciliation. Education programs focused on peacebuilding and conflict resolution gained traction, aiming to equip future generations with the tools needed to break the cycle of violence. Ultimately, this chapter of conflict closed not with triumphant victories but with a sober recognition of shared humanity and the heavy cost of war. The fragile ceasefire and ongoing peace efforts highlighted the truth that lasting security cannot be achieved through force alone but requires empathy, dialogue, and a commitment to coexistence. The war between Israel and Iran was a stark reminder of how quickly political tensions can spiral into devastating human tragedy. Behind the headlines and strategic maneuvers lay millions of lives disrupted, dreams deferred, and futures forever altered. Yet, even in the darkest moments, the resilience of ordinary people and the tireless work of peacemakers offered a beacon of hope. This conflict teaches us that peace is not merely the absence of war but a proactive, ongoing effort that demands courage, compromise, and compassion. It calls on us all, governments, communities, and individuals, to prioritize dialogue over division and humanity over hatred. As we remember those who suffered and honor those who worked for peace, may we also commit to building a world where such conflicts become a distant memory rather than a recurring reality. The road ahead is long and uncertain, but with persistent effort and shared resolve, it is a journey worth taking. For in the end, the true victory lies not in conquest, but in the restoration of dignity, security, and hope for all. If you found this video informative, please like, share, and subscribe for more in-depth analyses of global events. Leave your thoughts in the comments below, your voice matters.